Nadia Khan was a devoted wife, and Farouk Rahman was her pious father-in-law. But behind closed doors, their secret affair would ignite a chain of betrayal that ended in cold-blooded murder, all orchestrated by the one man they never thought would find out: Ahmed Rahman, her husband and his son. Nadia Khan was just 24 when her life changed forever. Raised in a conservative Muslim household in Bradford, England, she had lived a quiet and sheltered life. She wore modest clothes, never raised her voice, and followed every expectation laid out for her by tradition. When her parents arranged a marriage to Ahmed Rahman, a soft-spoken mechanic from Birmingham, she said yes without question. That's what was expected of her. Love, she was told, would come later. Stability came first. Ahmed, 28 at the time, was a calm, practical man. He wasn't handsome by most standards, but he was dependable. He didn't drink, didn't argue, and always sent money home to support his father. To Nadia's family, he seemed like a good man, a safe choice. They never asked what Nadia felt deep inside, and she never told them. On the surface, she smiled. Inside, she was already beginning to feel trapped. After their modest wedding, Nadia moved into the Rahman family home, a two-story red brick house in a quiet Birmingham neighborhood. She was now not only a wife, but also a daughter-in-law. The house was shared with Ahmed's father, Farouk Rahman, a widower in his late 50s. Farouk was respected in the local Muslim community, known for his charity work and strict religious values. He had lost his wife 10 years earlier to cancer and had never remarried. His role as the patriarch of the family was unchallenged, and his presence in the house was impossible to ignore. At first, everything seemed typical. Nadia cooked, cleaned, and adjusted to life in a new city. Ahmed left early each morning to work at a local garage and came home late. He was always tired. They barely spoke, except for routine conversations: what to eat, who called, what time to leave for prayer. He wasn't cruel, but he was emotionally distant. He had little interest in Nadia as a person. To him, she was fulfilling her role as a wife, nothing more. Farouk, on the other hand, was around all the time. He had retired early and spent most days at home or at the mosque. At first, his presence made Nadia uncomfortable. She avoided being in the same room with him. But gradually, that changed. Farouk was different from his son. He was articulate, well-read, and knew how to ask the kind of questions that made her feel seen. He would comment on the books she borrowed from the library, compliment the food she cooked, and praise her careful attention to prayer and household duties. These were small things, but they meant something in a house where Ahmed barely noticed her existence. The connection grew slowly. They were never alone intentionally, but shared moments naturally happened, while folding laundry, cleaning dishes, watering the plants outside. What began as polite conversation turned into familiarity. Nadia began looking forward to their short exchanges. She felt alive around him, something she hadn't felt since her wedding day. Farouk, for all his strict outward image, seemed to soften in her presence. As the weeks passed, subtle changes occurred. Nadia started wearing lipstick at home. She began styling her hair differently when Ahmed was away, but Farouk was around. She laughed more, spoke more confidently. Farouk, too, seemed changed. He was more animated, more present. But no one noticed. Ahmed was too distracted with work. Neighbors and family members assumed it was just a father-in-law supporting his daughter-in-law. No one saw what was brewing behind closed doors. Yet even Nadia herself didn't realize when things crossed the line. There was no single moment of decision. It was a slow drift, emotion leading to attraction, attraction leading to temptation. And once temptation entered the room, guilt tried to follow, but was often too late. The thrill of something forbidden, something dangerous, began to outweigh the weight of shame. Still, the affair had not yet begun. Not physically, but it was already living in their eyes, in the space between their footsteps, in the stolen glances over morning tea. Nadia began feeling torn between two versions of herself, the obedient daughter-in-law and the woman awakening to feelings she never thought she'd allow. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Ahmed remained unaware. Too focused on work, too trusting, too secure in the quiet routine of married life. He didn't see the cracks forming around him. He didn't hear the silence that followed Nadia up the stairs after her brief conversations with his father. He didn't know that his home, the one he thought was safe and devout, was slowly becoming a place of dangerous secrets. What started as a peaceful marriage built on tradition was now teetering on the edge of chaos. And soon, the line between comfort and betrayal would vanish completely. The change in the household was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable to anyone on the outside. But inside, the energy between Nadia and Farouk had shifted. What had once been polite distance now simmered with silent tension. Every glance lingered a moment too long. Every brush of hands in passing carried a quiet intensity. The walls of the Rahman home, built on tradition and honor, were slowly being swallowed by an invisible fire. It began with late-night routines. After Ahmed left for work at dawn, and before he returned late in the evening, Nadia and Farouk shared the house alone. Farouk would sit at the kitchen table, sipping his tea slowly, while Nadia moved around preparing food or tidying up. At first, it was quiet company, two people bound by circumstance. But gradually, they began talking more. He would ask about her past, her dreams, her thoughts. She would answer cautiously at first, then more freely as the days went on. Farouk listened in a way that Ahmed never did. He noticed the way she wrinkled her brow when she concentrated, the way her voice softened when she talked about her childhood. Their connection deepened like a slow-moving tide, inching closer without making a sound. Farouk began offering her books to read, poetry, religious texts, even romance novels. They would discuss the meanings late into the evening when Ahmed was upstairs or out running errands. Nadia started looking forward to those conversations. She began dressing differently in the house, still modest, but more expressive. A silk scarf instead of cotton, lip balm instead of bare lips. None of it obvious, none of it out of line, but all of it intentional. The turning point came one warm afternoon when the power went out in the neighborhood. The house fell silent. Nadia and Farouk found themselves in the dim kitchen, the only light filtering through the small window. They were standing too close, both reaching for the same dish. There was a pause, a moment heavy with something unspoken. Neither of them moved. That single moment, as brief as a heartbeat, crossed the invisible line they had danced around for weeks. From that day on, they no longer avoided the truth. Their conversations grew bolder. Their time together stretched longer. They began to share secrets, not just about the household or the past, but about each other. Nadia admitted her loneliness. Farouk admitted his regrets. The bond became more than emotional. It was physical now, and they both knew it. They found ways to be alone, to disappear for short moments during the day, to avoid suspicion. They thought they were careful. They believed they were discreet. But secrecy has a weight, and over time it starts to show. Nadia, once reserved and quiet, became more distracted. She made small mistakes, burnt food, forgotten chores, long silences during family conversations. Ahmed started noticing. At first, he chalked it up to stress or homesickness. But it was more than that. She had become distant. She barely asked about his day. She seemed irritated by his presence. He found her awake at odd hours, sitting alone in the kitchen or texting with someone she claimed was her cousin. He didn't press her. Not yet. But doubt had begun to form in the back of his mind. One evening, he returned home earlier than expected. Nadia was startled to see him, quickly shutting a book Farouk had given her. Her voice trembled slightly when she greeted him. Farouk, sitting on the sofa, looked up casually and offered tea like nothing was wrong. But Ahmed watched his father closely. Something was off. He could feel it. A quiet current ran beneath the surface of their home, and he couldn't yet explain what it was. But it was there, and it was growing stronger as the affair deepened. So did the danger. Nadia began experiencing nightmares. She would wake up in a sweat, haunted by fear and guilt. She started praying more, hoping to push away the shame she couldn't escape. But in daylight, the pull toward Farouk remained. Her faith and her feelings were locked in a battle she couldn't win. Farouk, too, wrestled with his conscience. But instead of stepping back, he justified their actions as fate. He believed they were meant to find each other, no matter the cost. And while the two of them spiraled deeper into forbidden passion, Ahmed quietly began watching. He listened for footsteps. He checked call logs. He noticed patterns. He wasn't ready to confront them yet. But he was waiting, planning, because even though they thought they were being careful, the truth was already slipping through the cracks. And in a house built on silence, secrets don't stay hidden forever. Ahmed was never the emotional type. He didn't show anger easily and rarely raised his voice. That's why, when he began suspecting something wasn't right between his wife and his father, he didn't react the way most men might. He didn't accuse or confront. He observed. He watched. And slowly, methodically, he began to collect the pieces of a puzzle he hadn't realized existed until recently. The first clue had been subtle. One evening, he noticed Nadia's phone light up while she was in the shower. A message flashed briefly. On the screen, a contact saved under an alias, but the wording was strange. Familiar, yet out of place. It wasn't what the message said that bothered him, but the timing. He filed it away in his mind and said nothing. Then, a few days later, he came home early again and saw Nadia rush to put something in the cupboard. She acted startled, her explanation forced. Again, he said nothing. But inside, something was starting to stir. He began checking the home security cameras. He rarely paid them much attention before, but now, every movement mattered. The footage didn't show anything obvious, just repeated patterns. Farouk and Nadia often stayed downstairs long after he went to bed. Their voices would carry softly through the floorboards. Laughter, conversations that paused when footsteps approached. Far too frequent to be coincidental. Ahmed started keeping a log. He marked dates and times. What they did, when they were alone. What changed in their behavior after each encounter. The tension in the house was growing. Nadia became irritable, distracted. She cooked less. She stayed longer on her phone. Farouk was equally changed, more secretive, more energized. He started leaving the house for walks at odd hours, sometimes late at night, coming back with a slight smile, as if returning from a memory instead of a stroll. Ahmed's suspicions turned into certainty when he finally decided to search Farouk's room while he was out. It was something he never imagined himself doing. But that day, his hands shook as he opened the drawers. At first, there was nothing out of place. Religious books, family documents, prayer beads. But in a small box, tucked away beneath old photographs, Ahmed found a collection of letters. Handwritten, carefully folded. Each one addressed to no one, signed by no one. But the handwriting wasn't Farouk's. It was Nadia's. The words were intimate, layered with hidden meanings. She never said his name, never referred directly to actions. But it was clear from the tone, the phrases, the emotion in every line. These were letters written from a woman in love, or something dangerously close to it. The dates matched the times Ahmed had logged. The entries confirmed what he feared. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. It had gone much further. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in the dark, staring at the door of the room he shared with Nadia. His mind raced with images, real and imagined. What she had done, what his father had allowed. The betrayal ran deeper than anything he could have imagined. And yet, he didn't feel rage. He felt shame. Shame for not seeing it sooner. Shame for being made a fool in his own home. But what could he do? In his culture, honor wasn't just a word, it was everything. A scandal like this could destroy more than just a marriage. It could rip through families, community ties, reputations. Divorce was one thing, but being exposed as a man whose wife had slept with his own father? That humiliation would be endless. Unforgivable.so, Ahmed decided not to confront them. He chose something darker. Revenge, planned carefully, carried out quietly. He began reaching out to people from his past. Old friends, distant relatives. One of them, a cousin from Manchester, had a history with the law. Petty crimes, minor. Time served. But he was loyal. And he owed Ahmed a favor. They met in a parking lot outside the city. Ahmed spoke little. He didn't give details. He just explained that someone had shamed his family and needed to be removed, without making it obvious. He wanted it to look like a break-in gone wrong. A tragic accident. No ties to him, no signs of planning. The cousin agreed. Money would be exchanged, and it would be done soon. Back at home, Ahmed continued his routine as if nothing had changed. He smiled at Nadia, spoke politely to his father. He even sat beside them during meals, acting like the devoted son and husband. But every glance, every word, now carried a double meaning. He watched them both like a predator waiting for the right moment. The pieces were now in motion. The betrayal had been confirmed. The plan was in place. And the quiet house on that suburban street, once filled with prayers and tradition, was now holding a storm no one saw coming. The night everything fell apart started like any other. There was nothing unusual about the way dinner was served or the quiet conversation at the table. Nadia had prepared a simple meal, and the three of them sat in their usual places, Ahmed at the head, Farouk to his left, and Nadia opposite. The atmosphere felt calm, but beneath the surface, something was building. Nadia felt it in Ahmed's stillness, in the way his eyes lingered a little too long. Farouk seemed unusually tired, rubbing his temples and glancing at the clock more than once. But none of them knew that the clock was ticking faster than they could feel. Ahmed excused himself early that evening, saying he needed to make a late visit to the garage. He didn't seem agitated or rushed, just quiet as always. Nadia barely looked up when he left. Farouk stayed behind, finishing his tea in silence while Nadia began clearing the dishes. The house fell into stillness. Outside, the late summer air was thick and silent. The street was quiet, dimly lit by the soft orange glow of aging street lamps. Inside, the Rahman home was dim, peaceful, almost frozen in time. At exactly 9:47 p.m., the doorbell rang. Farouk, already half asleep in the living room, looked up slowly. Nadia, who had gone upstairs to change, paused at the sound. She didn't expect anyone and hesitated for a moment before returning to the staircase. But Farouk was already moving toward the door. He opened it without much thought, expecting perhaps a neighbor or someone from the mosque. But what greeted him instead were two masked men, dressed in black, one holding a bat, the other a long kitchen knife. They pushed past him before he could even react. Nadia heard the crash, followed by a muffled grunt. She rushed halfway down the stairs and froze at the sight unfolding below. One of the men had knocked Farouk to the ground. The other was tearing through drawers, throwing items onto the floor. They spoke in short, harsh commands. It all happened too fast for her to make sense of it. She screamed, but one of the men turned sharply toward her and warned her to stay where she was. Her voice caught in her throat. Farouk tried to fight back. Despite his age, he was strong and refused to go down without a struggle. He reached for the leg of a nearby table, but the man with the bat was quicker. One blow to the ribs, then another, to the side of the head. The room echoed with the dull, sickening sound. Farouk slumped, blood trailing from his temple, his breathing shallow. The second man ran past him, grabbing a handful of jewelry from a dish near the hallway mirror, then nodded to his partner. Within seconds, both men were gone, vanishing into the night. Nadia stumbled down the stairs, her legs weak beneath her. Farouk was lying on the floor, his body twisted unnaturally. Blood pooled around his head. His eyes fluttered open briefly, then closed again. She reached for the phone, her hands shaking as she dialed emergency services, her voice barely forming words. Ahmed returned nearly an hour later. By then, the house was swarming with police, the flashing red and blue lights casting eerie reflections on the walls. An ambulance had already taken Farouk's body away. A neighbor comforted Nadia, who sat on the curb with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes wide, face pale. Ahmed approached slowly, playing his role to perfection. He asked questions. He acted stunned. He embraced Nadia, holding her, as she cried, pretending to mourn. The initial investigation pointed toward a burglary gone wrong. Nothing appeared staged. Items were missing. A forced entry was clear. There was no sign of premeditation, at least on the surface. Ahmed watched from a distance as detectives moved through the house. He knew better than to interfere too much. He answered questions calmly. He even offered the security footage, though he had already disabled the camera facing the front door hours before the attack. But Ahmed hadn't accounted for one small oversight. The neighbor across the street had recently installed a doorbell camera. It wasn't pointed directly at their house, but it caught part of the street. Days later, during a routine neighborhood check, a detective reviewed the footage and noticed a man walking toward the Rahman house around the same time of the break-in. He was wearing a hoodie, his face mostly covered, but there was something familiar about his posture. Investigators used facial recognition software on surrounding footage and narrowed the figure down to Ahmed's cousin, a known offender with a criminal record in Manchester. Things began unraveling quickly. Under pressure, the cousin cracked. He admitted to the attack, claimed it was a robbery, but slipped in one detail he wasn't supposed to. He said Ahmed had told him what time the house would be empty, except it wasn't empty. That part of the story didn't add up. Eventually, the full truth emerged. The money, the instructions, even the timing, it was all traced back to Ahmed. The investigators put it together piece by piece, each thread pulling the story toward a different conclusion. What everyone believed was a random tragedy was now a carefully orchestrated murder. A father killed by his own son. A husband seeking revenge not with confrontation, but with blood. The trial began 5 months after Farouk's death. By then, the media had already taken hold of the story. It was sensational, something torn from a dark thriller. A husband discovers an affair between his wife and his own father. A plan for revenge unfolds in silence. A respected elder murdered in his own home, not by a stranger, but by the very man he raised. Headlines were relentless, and whispers echoed through every mosque, cafe, and family gathering in the community. Ahmed sat in the courtroom, hands folded, eyes downcast. His once quiet demeanor now seemed cold, calculated. The prosecution laid out the timeline in brutal clarity. Messages recovered from his cousin's phone. Payments made in cash, traced through surveillance. Deleted texts, recovered by digital forensics, clearly showing his intent. No emotion, no panic. Just steps taken to remove the man who had betrayed him. Nadia was called as a key witness. Her appearance caused a stir in the courtroom. Dressed in black, headscarf tightly pinned, face pale, she looked hollowed by guilt and grief. But her testimony didn't offer redemption. She admitted to the emotional and physical affair with Farouk, breaking down as she described how it had started and how far it had gone. She claimed she never meant to hurt anyone, but the damage was undeniable. Her betrayal had set everything in motion. Even if she hadn't pulled the strings, her confession shattered whatever image the community had once held of her. Friends stopped speaking to her. Her own family, shamed by the scandal, refused to attend the trial. But despite the public judgment, the court did not charge her with a crime. She had not participated in the planning. She had not known about Ahmed's intentions. Legally, she was a witness, not an accomplice. The court listened to days of testimony, neighbors, detectives, digital analysts. Every detail was methodical. Ahmed's defense team tried to paint him as a broken man, someone pushed beyond his limits by betrayal and humiliation. They pleaded for leniency, citing emotional trauma, cultural pressure, and mental strain. But the jury saw through it. Ahmed had not acted in a moment of rage. He had planned it, arranged it, watched it unfold from a safe distance. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. After the trial, the Rahman house was put up for sale. No one wanted to live in it. The memories were too heavy, the scandal too raw. The once respected name of the family had become something to whisper about in shame. What had been a home rooted in faith and tradition was now a symbol of betrayal, destruction, and silence. Nadia disappeared from public view. She moved out of Birmingham, her exact location kept private. Some said she left the country. Others claimed she entered therapy and lived under a new name. Wherever she went, her life as she knew it had ended. She had lost her husband, her lover, and her place in the community. She had walked into a marriage as a dutiful daughter and walked out of it as the center of a tragedy no one would forget. That Ahmed's cousin received a reduced sentence in exchange for his full cooperation with the investigation. He testified against Ahmed in court and revealed every detail of the plan. Though he had committed the act, the law recognized him as a tool in a larger scheme. His fate was sealed in a lesser prison, but his life, too, was forever changed. Detective Sarah Malik, who led the investigation, later described the case as one of the most emotionally disturbing of her career. It wasn't just the murder that haunted her, it was the quiet unraveling of a family from the inside out. She said the hardest part wasn't proving who did it. It was understanding why no one stopped it before it reached the point of no return. The story remained in headlines for weeks, then faded, like most true crimes do. But in the streets of Birmingham, people still remember the Rahman case. Parents warn their children about dishonor. Communities speak more carefully about the dangers of secrecy. And for those closest to the story, the pain never truly went away. What began as a silent betrayal between two people spiraled into a storm that consumed an entire family. In the end, love was not the driving force, nor was it hatred alone. It was pride, shame, and silence, the most dangerous ingredients in any household hiding the truth.